When Katrina asked if I would speak, I immediately said yes. But it also brought back a lot of thoughts about our particular journey as a scientific association and events and conferences. So I thought that's what I do. I'm going to present a story which is our journey that you will relate, many of you will relate to parts of it, some of you might relate to a lot of it, and some of you might relate to only bits of it. But it's the journey we went through, and then at the end of that I'm going to give 10 tips on successful management of conferences and events from my perspective. But it's interesting, as we've got more involved, we've started to go to, or I've started to go to some of these convention bureau events and understand a little bit more about the global event business, because we're now involved in that, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the presentation. But something like 80% of all events in the world are science-based. I was talking to Nicole before, and you know, the plumbers and the electricians don't go to 20 events a year or 10 events a year, but scientists do. And by scientists, I'm talking about the broad-based science, that's medical conventions, but science-based conventions comprise something like 80% of all the global meetings, and probably a big chunk of all of regional and smaller meetings as well, because we're natural networkers. You know, when you're in our industry in particular, which is, you know, life sciences, but scientists in general are networkers. They like to share information, they like to learn information, and it's just something that's in our DNA, if you like. So it becomes a very important part of what we do in this sector. It's interesting, I remember I started in 2005 at AusBiotech, and Anna Lavelle, our CEO, started about 3 months before me. She was the one who actually conned me into starting at AusBiotech. Once you work in a not-for-profit industry or science-based organisation, you'll know the challenges, and we didn't know any of them when we started. We were babes in the woods, but we've both done the journey now. And I remember after about 2 or 3 years in, we were sitting down having a coffee, and she said, "You're a microbiologist and I'm a molecular biologist, and what we are really now are lobbyists and event planners." And that's what we certainly spend a lot of our time doing. So we are, as Michael said, an industry organisation primarily. We have about 3,500 members currently, and we've been going for about 27 years, because we were the Australian Biotechnology Association for many years, which was the association model with the state branches. And then in 2001, the federal government gave them some funding, and we morphed into AusBiotech, which is a not-for-profit public unlisted company limited by guarantee. The lawyer talked about all these issues when she did her presentation. So that's the model that we've gone down. We have a constitution, we have a board of directors, and we have state branches, and we also have specialty groups within our organisation. We've got AusMedTech, which is medical devices and diagnostics. We've got an AusFoodTech group, and we've got an agricultural biotechnology group. And we've recently, with CropLife and the National Farmers Federation, formed the Agricultural Biotechnology Council of Australia. So we're very broad-based in terms of our members and our stakeholders. So as I said, this is going to be a story of a scientific association and its event management journey. As I mentioned, we both started in 2005, and we had about, I think the total staff of AusBiotech was about 4 or 5 staff, and we inherited an event team of one person and a process. And I've said here that the team was marginal, the person was marginal, and the process was worse. And we really had no idea what was going on. At that stage, we used to run a national conference and I think in a few small state events. We came in just before the 2005 national conference and we had already contracted with a PCO. Does everyone know the term PCO? I guess you do. The Professional Conference Organiser. Yep. I try not to use acronyms, but yeah, professional conference organisers, of which there's hundreds in Australia. And there's a number that say they specialise in this sector, and there's a couple that I think are very good, and there's a few that I think are marginal. But we inherited a PCO that was running our national conference in 2005, and we were also set to run a major international meeting called ABIC in 2006, which is the Agricultural Biotechnology International Conference. So we suddenly inherited all this stuff with quite an investment, that were an investment in people and time, not so much money, because under the model we had then, the PCO was taking a chunk of the risk. But what happened was, I suddenly realised at the end of the 2005 national conference, the people from the PCO came along and said, "Oh, by the way, here's a cheque for $71,000. Conference went quite well." And I went, "Well, what the hell does that mean?" Yeah. There was no transparency. We basically just got given a cheque. And I remember I spent 2 weeks in my office and with a whiteboard, and I'm not an accountant. I've got I guess I've got more of a business background now than I had years ago, but so I just sat there and tried to work out what the hell happened, and I figured we really should have got about $270,000 instead of $70,000. We didn't have access to I think also Chris talked a little bit about this, and perhaps what was the lady's name, the lawyer? Vera. I think Vera talked a bit about this too. There was no transparency, and we really didn't know what had been paid or what had been charged, and I didn't like that model. Now, some people may prefer that model, but that wasn't a model that we particularly liked. Well, I didn't like it, and we decided that that we would change the model and take some control over the process. By the way, I ended up getting $240,000 back from them. So we fought over the last $30,000 or so. And we'd already contracted them to run this other major event coming up. So I told them that I wanted to rewrite the contract, and we rewrote the contract so that there was more transparency in terms of what was the expense line, I guess. I wasn't as much worried about the revenue line, although there were some issues there with sponsorship and exhibition and other things. And these are significant conferences. Our national conference, the budget is over $1 million, and the ABIC conference back then in 2006, the budget was probably $700,000, $800,000. So we're not talking about small amounts of money. So we decided we'd take more control of the process and change it, but we would still use a PCO because we didn't have the capability internally to do it, either in terms of the expertise or the staff. So we got a new PCO, and the contract we wrote with them was that they would collect the money, they would do the registrations. We managed the program still, and I think that's an important part that most of you would know, that you're the people who know your business better than anyone else. So you've got to control the program. I think there was a talk about abstracts and things. I mean, you've got to control all of that really, because even if you want someone else to manage the event, you need to manage that. No one can really manage that for you. So the process that we worked on was that we'd run the program. By then we'd started to develop some relationships, so I wanted to manage more of the sponsorship and to attract the the sponsors' dollars from the people we knew, and a lot of those for us are the large pharmaceutical companies and the large service providers, the big law firms and accounting firms and patent attorneys. They're the people that give us sponsorship money for a lot of our events. So we managed that, but the rest of it we basically left up to them, but I had regular meetings. Especially the last 6 months before the conference, I probably met with them fortnightly. And we had employed a new event manager, and she met with them on a more regular basis about some of the finer detail in terms of the functions and the sessions and that type of thing. And then we started to expand our whole events business, and we started to run more events. And during that period, probably 2006, 2007, we started another 2 national events, one of them which is still going, which is probably one of the largest events of its type in this part of the world. And I started to see that, and again, I was talking to Nicole before, it's such a big part of the engagement of our members. In our particular industry, the events is one of the key things people join AusBiotech for. We don't have a lot of professional development anymore. We've tried it at times, but it hasn't worked for us. They don't have to belong to AusBiotech for any registration purposes. So one of the reasons they belong is to network, to understand what other people are doing in the sector. And we do a lot of global engagement. And I'll talk a bit about that as well. We run events internationally as well now. So we set up 2 other national events. One was called Business Development Forum, and the other was AusMedTech, which is our medical device event, which I think the first year we had 100 people. Now we get about 300 or 400 people too. So then moving into the next phase was perhaps 2008 through 10, and we progressively changed the model with the PCO, the company we chose, we enjoyed working with. One of the first things that got me nervous was I sat down at my desk one day and I figured they were holding about $1.5 million worth of our money. And I thought, what the hell if they go broke tomorrow? You might say I should have thought of that before, but it was one of those eureka moments. And I thought, hell. So we started taking all the money in. They ran the registration process, but it went through to our bank account. And we started signing the checks in terms of the outlays. We still relied on them to do a lot of the negotiation and look for the best supplier and all those sorts of things. We didn't have the expertise to do that, but we did bring the financial side in. I felt a lot more comfortable doing that. We started running doing all the sponsorship then, and they were really. The next model was that they ran the exhibit for us because we didn't have enough staff to do that. We have something like 140 exhibitors at the national conference. So they were running that. They were doing the registrations because we didn't have the software in-house then. You've got to have specialised software if you start getting up to 1,000 people or 1,500 people. So the model changed again, but they were happy with that because they were still getting revenue and they were still involved in our business. But we then assumed management of all of our other events. So we then ran our AusMedTech event, our BD Forum. We were running 2 international exhibitions then on behalf of the Commonwealth. We have run the bio exhibit in the US now for about 8 years. That's a big project. That's nearly $1 million project. We were running the Australian exhibit at Medica in Dusseldorf on behalf of the Commonwealth and the States, and that was about half that size. So we suddenly were running and getting involved in a lot more events and conferences. So we increased our staff, but you'd be amazed how much you can do with really good people. I think we had about 3 people then running the events team. And then we came to this fork in the road where the events business to us was suddenly a big part of our, not only our revenue, but our business in general. We over the last few years, we turn over about 4 million. We've been up to around nearly $5 million, and of that, the membership revenue has never been more than $1 million. So we leverage our membership revenue up by 3 to 4 times. It was 5 times once, and we do that through events. We have done professional development over the years, but we really don't see that as a way forward for us. And the other revenue stream is that we run programs on behalf of governments, both state and federal. And they've been extensive. I mean, we ran 2 nodes of NCRIS, the National Collaborative Research Infrastructure, and we had $60 million through those 2 projects, and they were big projects. And we used to get a management fee for running those. So we've run various things for both the federal and the state governments, and that's the other part of our revenue stream. So it's been $1.5 million down to $500,000, depending on what's happening in the year. But we came to this fork in the road, and we had to decide whether we would continue with using a PCO or we would do it ourselves. And Anna and I made the decision that we would do it ourselves. It's a big decision. You assume more risk. You have to employ more people. You have to get more technology. The first event software program we bought cost us about $30,000 or $40,000 then. It wasn't really that good. Again, we were still not quite as experienced as what we are now. But anyway, we decided we would do it ourselves. So we went to 5 staff. We purchased one lot of event management software. We've now moved to another. And we've also purchased other software and technology to manage events, and it's one of the things I'm going to talk about with my tips. This area is very, it's changing. People expect more at events. They want to have access to data quicker. Everyone's got smartphones and PCs and now iPads. So the technology that we've purchased over these years has enabled us to get rid of a lot of paper-based systems, and just about all of them are electronic. The other thing we did back in about 2008, we determined that one of the key things people wanted to do at our events, the program was important, but they wanted to meet people. So we contracted with a company out of Santa Clara, and we were one of the first people to run business matching programs at these events. We did it before Bio did, and Bio had 20,000 people go to their events. We now, at our national conference, we build 100 rooms in the exhibit area, and for those of you that have been to it, you would have used the software. The software enables people to make one-on-one meetings. The software determines what meeting room you're in and what time you're meeting, and we have something like 3,000 meetings take place at the conference now, and it's all automated and it's all part of a software program. We've just purchased a new one, an updated version, which also includes a smartphone app and some other stuff I haven't quite got my head around either, but we can do a lot more stuff. And this is the way not only do we communicate at the event, but we communicate prior to the event. Again, Nicole was saying to me, how do you communicate with, what part is communication in your events business? I'm going to talk about it later when I give my tips, but it's a big part of it. You've got to communicate continually with the people, the potential people who are going to your events, and then you've got to communicate with those that sign up as a delegate, and then you've got to communicate with them during the event, and we also communicate with them post-event as well. And that's through a database that we've built up. We have one person full-time now managing our database. That's all she does. Our member database is about 3,500 people, and our broader database, which is non-members and interested people, is about 9,500, 10,000 people. So we decided to do it ourselves. And then in 2012, we had been approached by a number of people to look at managing some international events. the first group was the Melbourne Convention Bureau. Business Events Sydney are a similar organisation. Brisbane and Adelaide have a small group associated with their convention centres, and I'm not sure what happens in Perth. But these people are always on the lookout for international events to bring to their city. As I mentioned, they are lucrative, and most of them are science-based. And we've been approached a couple of times by the Melbourne Convention Bureau if we wanted to manage some events, and we really didn't think that was our business, and we didn't have necessarily the time more than the expertise. I believe we had the expertise then. So Anna and I came up with a proposal we put to the board in 2012, or late 2011 actually, that we could set up another organisation within AusBiotech, and we called it AusEvents, and it would be there to manage events on behalf of other people. We got the go-ahead to do that on the proviso that it would be science-based. We took legal advice from Deloitte in terms of what did that mean to our status and a whole bunch of others. So we checked and made sure that what we were doing was relevant to our constitution, our charter, our legal obligations, etc. And all of that was ticked off. So we set up AusEvents as a professional conference organiser for the life science and technology events. And it's proved very successful. We've increased the staff, as I said, in the events team to manage it. We manage both events across both groups, but we share the software, obviously, so we have a full event management software. We run MyOb, which is very good for events because you can compartmentalise them into projects, so that's always worked well for us with the interface. And it's actually done two things for us. One, it's enhanced our brand, and AusBiotech is, we believe, a global brand. We're well known internationally, and it's also enhanced our brand in Australia, and we've picked up more members out of doing this as well, which is also good for the organisation. So what we use as our pitch, if you like, is that we're experienced at delivering major industry events. We've got extensive contacts, not only globally, not only in Australia, but also globally. And we've been quite successful in transferring a lot of our sponsors across to some of these other events. We're running an event in Sydney next year, an international event for the Society for Brain Mapping and Therapeutics, which is an international event across a broad spectrum of brainomics, if you like it. There's neurologists, neurosurgeons, neuroscientists, and it'll be about 400 or 500 people. And I've actually convinced about 5 of our members to actually come on as sponsors for that event as well as the international group out of LA bringing some of their sponsors along. So we've added value to the whole relationship in terms of sponsorship and exhibition as well. Vera talked about contracts before, and contracts around events and conferences. And our basic model is that we're infinitely flexible. You know, we're not a private company. We're not trying to make money. We don't want to make losses, and we certainly look at this as a revenue stream, but we're not trying to do it as a purely commercial exercise. So when Katrina came to us and said, would you help us with the Science Meets Parliament? We've done a deal. I did a deal with these guys in Los Angeles. That's a totally different deal. We're running major international events. We're filling up our pipeline now, and all of them are different. Some we share revenue, some we're taking all the risk, others we're just acting as a contractor. So we're prepared to be flexible, and we think that model works well for us because you, as your own association, know what you want, know what you can manage and what you can't manage, and that's the same for even some of the big international organisations. So we've been very flexible in terms of what we offer. So where are we currently? At the moment, our national conference is our biggest individual event that we run for ourselves. We run another 4 national events now of our own for our sector. About 5 years ago, we started looking at investment as a priority in our sector because our companies were coming to us and saying, the companies, the smaller Australian companies, both the public and the private, saying that the thing that they woke up worrying about in the morning was money, and the thing they worried about when they went to bed at night was money. And why aren't you guys getting involved in the capital markets and the investment arena? So back in 2008, we ran our first investment meeting in Melbourne. We had 40 companies pitch in a day, and we had about 200 or 150 investors in the room. This has now morphed into a whole international series, and we other than the resource sector, we run more international and attract more capital in Australia than any other industry association. And that's not me saying it, that's the ASX. We've also done some independent surveys, and a year ago we'd raised something like $400 million into our sector through international and national events that we ran for the investment side. So we currently run a large 2-day event in Australia every year. We run an investment meeting in New York. We're running one in San Francisco next year. And with a partner, we're running an investment meeting in Hong Kong every year. We ran one this year, and that'll be a permanent thing we do. So basically, it's Australian companies going over and pitching to a whole bunch of investors. Sometimes it's an afternoon, sometimes it's a day, sometimes it's 2 days. But it's an event for us, and we charge. We never charged in the early days, but we now charge, and the company's prepared to pay. If we can get 300 investors in a room, they'll pay to pitch. So we see it as twofold. One is it's satisfying the requirements that our members and our CEOs wanted in terms of us getting involved in it, but it also gives us some revenue and gives us some profile, etc. We run the Australian exhibit at Bio. We're not doing Medica anymore. We decided that wasn't what we could add value to our member base or the industry. We run about 12 large state-based events, and we run about 20 other smaller state events every year. So you can see it's a pretty full-on schedule. And Oz Events, that's developed, and again that's been a lesson of which I've actually presented to the Melbourne Convention Bureau, and I'm presenting to the Sydney Convention Bureau people in about 3 or 4 weeks' time. Again, some lessons we've learned and some thoughts and ideas that we have in terms of trying to attract international science-based events to Australia. But there's these long lead times. You know, I'm currently bidding for events for 2021, and the young women in my team, they all happen to be young women, they're saying, I said, listen, I'm not going to be here to do this one, so you guys better start concentrating, because if we win this, you're the ones who are going to be delivering it. But that's the sort of lead times that these major international events require. You know, some of them are 7, 8, 9 years out. And the convention bureaus are booked out for that time too. You'd be amazed if you came up with a 3,000 person event right now and went to the Melbourne Convention Bureau and said you wanted September 2018, I would say you'd have no hope. You might get August, but a lot of people don't want to travel from North America in August. But you know, this whole global events business and conference is really interesting in terms of when you can do things and how far out you need to be doing them. So where are we with Oz Events right at the moment? 2013, we're running about 2 or 3 international events a year. We're running about 4 or 5 national events, and I call Science Meets Parliament one of those. We do Research Australia's event for them every year now. And we've got a pipeline of events we've won through to 2016, and as I said, we're bidding up to 2021 currently for a number of these events. The presentation I'm giving to the Melbourne Convention Bureau is on a bid we've just won for the International Biotechnology Symposium, which is part of IUPAC. IUPAC's the International Union of Physical and Applied Chemistry, the big global chemical association, and they run a number of events, but they also, one of them is a biotechnology event, and we started working on that in about 2011, and I had to go to Istanbul in August to pitch to them to get the event for Melbourne for 2016, and we were successful. And that's going to be about 3,000 people. And one of the reasons we were successful because we're running it in conjunction with our national conference that year. And they are all science-based, and we are a mixture of science and industry-based, so they like that mix. So we'll run this combined event in Melbourne in October 2016. So that was our journey. Some of you are part of that journey, some of you might be at the beginning of it, others might not have even started, but that's the journey that we went down as a science-based industry association, and where the path we took, which is not for everyone, and it's probably not for many really if you want to go down that whole track, because from listening to some of the earlier presentations, a lot of you don't have many staff. You know, we've now got, we've been up to about 17 or 18 staff, we're about 14 now, and half of that, if you include the time that I spend and that the finance people spend on events, you know, it's probably nearly half of our business. So for what it's worth, from a novice who knows a little bit more than he used to, some tips, just to finish off. You can never be too early, and I think most of you who are doing this would know. Trying to run events when you're running out of time, starting them and manage them is not a good way to begin. So start as early as you can, develop very, very strict schedules and stick to them. As early as you can, and you would know this in terms of your own events, know your audience and your stakeholders. And sometimes that's easier said than done, but really know who you want to actually get at that event, and what you actually want to achieve from it. And we always do that very early on, and from that often forms a theme that we will designate to the event. Develop a plan, and it should be as detailed as possible, but you also need flexibility because things go wrong and things change. Again, back in those very early days when we were talking to these conference organisers, they were saying to Anna and I, "You two wouldn't understand. This is very specialised. This is that's all bullshit. It's a project." And while Anna was a better scientist than I ever was, but we were pretty good at projects, and that's an event is a project. But you need a plan, and you need a very specific and detailed plan, and you need some what ifs, some flexibility. Budgets are very important. We are now very good at doing budgets. In fact, the Convention Bureau actually asked us to do a budget for them the other day for someone else, and I said no, we're not going to start doing that. But my finance team have got very good with budgets, and we've learnt all the tricks. I reckon I've been conned by everyone once. I've been conned by the Sydney Convention Bureau once, and I swore I would never be conned by a Convention Bureau again. I've been conned by AV people. I've been conned by everyone, but only once. And I think we've got to the stage now where we do know how to run an event, a small one and a big one. And you know, so that's what our budgeting is about. So develop a budget and stick to it, and it'd be amazing how much money you can save as well. And I could tell you 100 war stories, and I've got no time to do that. Again, that discussion I have with Nicole. Develop a message and communicate it effectively and frequently, and that's something we've certainly learned to our detriment over the years. The other thing which is really interesting is also in this whole event management, conference management business, you've also got to pay attention to the very small details. And you guys that know some of this, the people that didn't like the sandwiches. You know, you've just put on a conference for 3,000 people and someone comes up and says, I don't like white bread. Not that you can manage everyone's expectations, but small details. I remember one of our first conferences we were running by ourselves. The first plenary we had Brian McNamee, the CEO of CSL, doing a plenary, had some slides, and he went to use the pointer and it didn't work. And Hayley, who's our event manager, started running around. Now we have 2 pointers, or we have 3 microphones, and all these little things. So you've also got to pay attention to the small details. Have backup scenarios, especially if it involves anything outdoors. So we've run a number of things where we've had outdoor components, and we always have a backup because it's going to rain or something's going to happen sooner or later. We also have backups for some of our other major events in terms of other facilities management scenarios as well. But, I know Vera talked about events, buildings burning down, but we've never had a convention centre burn down or a hotel burn down, so we haven't gone quite that far, but you do need to have some backup scenarios. Keeping in touch is a bit like the message and communicating. You've got to continually communicate with the people who are running or helping you run the event, also the speakers as well as the delegates. So we do that on a reasonably sophisticated basis now with emails and other, and we're using more of the social media things now as well to do that. Use the latest technology available and continuously refresh your recurring events. Oh, sorry. Again, I mentioned before we've had a couple of different event management programs. We're now gone into the next level where we've got these smartphone applications, and there's more things happening all the time. And again, I think it was Chris talking about the Y generation, and the younger delegates that start coming to your events, they're not going to put up with reading bits of paper and having programs photocopied and all this nonsense. They want things instantaneous. They want to be able to use their technology, so we've kept up with that. And refreshing recurring events. For those of you that are doing a national conference every year, we learnt that a few years ago, and I know then there's a lot of events we go to where people haven't learnt that. So we've continually tried to refresh our meetings, both in terms of how we manage them, the formats, and some of the social activities around them. Just continuously look to do things a bit differently, keep people's interest up so that if you're expecting 80% of your people to come to your national event every year, you're going to have to look at doing things a bit differently from time to time. And then finally, we do quite a lot of surveys post-event and talk to the delegates about their experiences, what could we do better, and we do listen and we do change. So as I said, for what it's worth, they're my 10 tips, and I'm nearly at my my time.
Would you be prepared to answer a couple of questions?
Yes, I can. I've got a car. Unfortunately, I've got to leave straight away now. I've got to head back, so I've got a car picking me up in about 10 minutes or so. But yeah.
So 2 minutes, 2 or 3 minutes.
Some questions. I'm happy if anyone wants to ask me.
Anybody want some questions from the audience? Yes.
You mentioned that the younger generation wants things like abstracts and the program electronically. Do you still find that you need to have them as a printed book for the older generation?
We actually don't do a program anymore. For some of our events, we do a little pocket program that women can put in their purse and men can put in their jackets. And some of them will still have boards with some of the abstracts, but we do everything electronically now.
Can I ask another question there? Do people like that? Because I think we all have that problem when you go to a conference and you get immediately handed a bag full of 25 tonnes of paper. I think virtually everyone throws it in the bin. But there's an issue there. The sponsors want to put something somewhere, and you can hardly say, no, we won't put your thing in the thing when you're giving us $15,000. But also, for something as complex as Science Meets Parliament, we traditionally have had a book about that fat. Are you telling me, Glenn, we can cut that cost?
Yes.
We'll talk later.
Okay.
But people don't...
Now, well, again, I mean, I think Chris said, we've got 3,500 members. When we went from our paper-based journal to electronic, I was the one who drove that, and I was the oldest person in the company. And everyone's going, no, you've got to... And I said, no. And I think out of 3,500 members, we had 40 complaints. So some people are not going to be happy with you doing that. But my thing is, if 70% are happy, then you're way in front.
And sponsors are happy with having their branding online rather than having it in a hard copy.
We very rarely do little bags and stuff nowadays. We at one stage we were paying $40,000-$50,000 a year for satchels. Our national conference this year, my team talked me into. I said I don't even want to do one. They talked me into still doing one. It cost us about $3,000, just a small. But people throw them in the bin, or don't use them. How many of you kept over the years? Yeah,
Landfill.
you ditched them.
Every one of them.
It's a made for a shopping bag.
Yeah. Construction banks, that's weird.
One more question. All right, Glenn, I think you can safely
So I was just
escape.
going to quickly ask how important Twitter and things of that are like, do you think, during conferences?
Excellent question. We don't Twitter, and the only reason we haven't is that we haven't really looked at it much. I don't know. I don't know. We communicate with them during the conference. We communicate with them electronically, and sometimes we'll even do a little one-page newsletter, which is paper-based, to hand out to people. But I'd really rather do that electronically as well in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much,
Michael.
Glenn.
I hope I